Hey guys, Pete here. This will be my Westworld Season 1 Episode 7 recap and review. It will contain spoilers for everything that's happened in the show through Episode 7. If you're not caught up, you'll want to stop watching. Now, let's get right into it. We start out with Bernard having a dream about his son. He's reading Alice's adventures in Wonderland to him while he's in the hospital. He has a moment where his son says everything would be different, including me, and Bernard assures him that he's perfect and that he will beat this. Moments later, his condition gets worse, but then Bernard wakes up in his bed. At the center, Bernard is checking up on Hector. He brings up a recent blacklisted exchange with a guest. Hector says he wanted to cut off a piece of him, the guest, to take on his carry-on and put it on the hood of his car. Hector answers that this didn't change his opinion about his world, and then Bernard shows him a self-awareness test. He shows him photographs of modern life, and Hector says they don't look like anything to him. Assistant comes in, and we learn that Hector is needed for a special request by management and that Elsie hasn't returned from the theater where we last saw her. William and Lawrence are playing cards on the train and we see Dolores in there as well. They make small talk for the most part and we see that Dolores still hasn't warmed up to Lawrence after what happened. He says that they came to him wanting to join up with the Confederados. William tells him this was Logan's idea and Lawrence points out that they made it further than Logan, so maybe they have more of a taste for this thing than they thought. Dolores looks out the window to see heads and skulls on pikes. She asks what's going on and Lawrence tells her that they are in Ghost Nation territory, the most savage tribe there is. He says the heads are the folks who came calling without an invitation. They lock down the train saying it's the only way through, but when they clear their territory they'll be able to get off. Bernard is trying to reach Elsie, but the system says she can't be located. He goes to see Theresa, who called for him. We notice that he no longer trusts her, and that by the time he leaves, that the feeling goes both ways. Other than that, we find out that management is looking over all departments. She says his is behind schedule on their diagnostics, to which he says that won't be a problem. She mentions if they spent as much energy on their jobs as they do on her investigation, and he cuts her off and assures her that that part of things is over. Theresa heads down a hallway where we hear some sex going on. When she knocks on the door, we find out that management's special request for Hector came from Charlotte, who's in the middle of using him for her pleasure. Theresa's surprised, but Charlotte has her in for a meeting anyway. She shuts Hector off and begins explaining the situation. She tells Theresa that she's always been good at her job, and that's why she was so shocked about the woodcutter situation. We learn the whole game plan of what corporate's up to. Charlotte explains that the value of the intellectual property at Westworld is all that Delos cares about. Because of a mistake one of her predecessors made, 35 years of it only exists in one place. For that reason, Ford has tremendous leverage, so they need to get the information out of the park. Then they can ask him to politely retire. If he refuses, they can show them that, they don't really need him and they can move on. She says she's going to give Theresa one more chance to fix things after putting her in her place. Then she says that the gods require a blood sacrifice. They need to demonstrate just how dangerous Ford's creations can be. She says they need somebody thoroughly unexpected, and the scene ends with that. We see Maeve wake up in her bed and then cut to the Mariposa. We see that she's in her normal loop, but that she has a much different look on her face. When she comes in, she looks around and walks over to the piano, closes the top so it stops playing. Clementine comes to her and they carry on their normal conversation, but this time they don't get interrupted, so we learn more about Clementine's backstory. She has a family with a farm with bad soil, so she sends them money. She thinks after a few more years of working in the Mariposa, she'll be able to get her family out of the desert to take them somewhere cold, and she can have whatever life she wants whenever she gets there. Then all the hosts but Maeve freeze, and we see the techs approaching. One says to the other that it's the one at the bar they need, and Maeve grabs a knife in case they're coming for her. It turns out it's Clementine they're after, and we hear them say whatever she did must have been pretty bad if they're sending them for her in broad daylight. Maeve looks disturbed after they leave, but we don't see anything else. We get a really intense scene with Dolores and William. They talk about what they're hoping to find. She said that she didn't know what she would find, but she wasn't going to go back to the life she had, where she had been so sure everything was the way it was supposed to be. Basically, she wanted to live a life in the moment rather than looking back or forward all the time. He tells her that when he was young, all he had were books, and he lived in them. Then he came there, and it was like he could be part of the story. She says she doesn't want to be a part of a story, and then he tells her about his life at home and how he'll be married when he gets back. This upsets her, and he tries to justify it by saying he has a good life that's worth pretending for, and then she runs off. Of course, he ends up following her, and when he finds her in a different car, he tells her, that how could he go back to pretending after finding this? They kiss and get lost in the moment. As they're about to have sex for the first time, the scene cuts away. Back at the center, we see what Charlotte had planned. They pull in Ford and Bernard to demonstrate what Theresa and her team found in their investigation. They have Clementine in a room with a tech who she approaches as she normally does. He punches her in the face and starts beating her down. Stubbs freezes things, and we see that the tech was a host who was programmed to do what happened. They wipe Clementine's memory and have her start again. She's beat up, and it's a pretty tough scene to watch altogether. When she approaches this time, he hits her, but she immediately starts fighting back. She ends up killing the other host by smashing his head against the window repeatedly. They send Stubbs in, but she doesn't respond to the voice commands to stop all motor functions. When she starts to advance on him, he shoots and kills her. Theresa explains that the Reveries code had caused problems. Even when they rolled back the update, the hosts were holding on to memories that make them override their programming. Of course, at the time, it isn't clear if they set this up, but it sure feels like it. Ford doesn't say anything the entire time. Charlotte says they will have to rebuild all the hosts from scratch, and when Bernard says, "You want us to do what?" she fires him. She gives him a chance to explain why it isn't his fault, but he doesn't say anything at all. Ford also stays silent, but gives a next level evil genius look at things as Bernard walks away. William's sleeping on the train, and we see that Dolores is drawing a pretty amazing landscape of the canyon on a drop cloth that's covering something that's being shipped on this route. William wakes up, and she says, "I know last night was unexpected, and if you regret it," but he swoops right in to give her a kiss. She says she knows he has someone waiting at home, and then he explains that, he has this place figured out now. He used to think the place was about pandering to your baser instinct, but now he knows that if it actually reveals your deepest self, it shows you who you really are. He points out what he did to Logan was what he always wanted to do to show him what he actually thought about him, and says he never felt like he did last night with any other woman. He says she's unlocked something in him, and she says that she's not a key, she's just herself. He notices her drawing and asks what it is. She says she doesn't know. She used to paint at home, but she only ever copied the world around her. She woke up this morning and decided to draw something new. She imagined something beautiful, a place where the mountains met the sea. As they're talking, the train comes to an abrupt stop. It's an ambush by the Confederados, who block the tracks so that they could ride up and light the passenger car up with a Gatling gun. As they're firing, we don't see what everyone else is doing inside, but after they stop, we see a horse ride out with a white flag, which I assumed was Lawrence. It turns out to be Slim's body, which Lawrence shoots to set off the explosion. They use this as a diversion so they can take off on horses to try to get away, but the Confederados are obviously chasing right behind. Dolores gets knocked off her horse, so William has to go back to rescue her. Right as the Confederados are closing in, the Ghost Nation starts to attack them. As they're slaughtering them, Lawrence, Dolores, William, and two more nitro-filled corpses make their escape. They ride until they get to a plateau, and then they see that area that Dolores had drawn in her picture earlier. She has William stop, and they both recognize that it is what she had drawn. Lawrence says they need to get going because the Ghost Nation will come after them soon, and the two corpses are itching to get involved in the war effort. Dolores says she's had enough of war, and William tells Lawrence this is where they part ways. He asks him what's beyond the river, to which Lawrence says, "You'd have to ask the dust. No one has ever made it back from there." Maeve is in for repairs, and we notice that Felix is working with a different partner on her. He sends her away as he's finishing up, and then Maeve grabs his arm. She wants to know where Clem is, and she forces Felix to take her there. We see that she's being decommissioned as Theresa looks on. As the process is underway, Bernard comes in to ask for a word with Theresa, and they leave. Maeve is upset watching what's happening with Clementine, but her and Felix take off at that same time to not draw any attention to themselves. She does does give Theresa a look on her way past, though. Bernard tells Theresa that the test was a sham. He tells her that the show that they put on had obvious signs of human intervention in the code, and that if he noticed, he couldn't imagine what Ford thought about the whole thing. With nothing left to do, he plays his card that he knows that she was responsible for the stray and the satellite communication. He then tells her there's something wrong, possibly related to the code Arnold wrote, where the hosts access past memories that lead to improvisation. She tells him that her main concern has always been the people in the park and their safety, which he acknowledges, and then says he has to show her something. They get on the elevator after he mentions that some of the hosts were on the verge of a change. Sylvester is trying to explain to Maeve why he had to retire Clementine. Maeve listens and then basically lays out how things are going to be. She tells them that she used to think they were gods, but then she realized they were just men, and she knows men. She tells them that she's going to get out of there, and despite their protestations, tells them that they're going to help. In the elevator, Bernard and Theresa talk over the events that led up to the current situation. It basically boils down to her doing what she had to do in the interest of Delos so that they could get rid of Ford without him, being able to destroy all the intellectual property. Bernard points out that he wouldn't have let him destroy all their work, and then she asks if he really thinks that what corporate is really worried about is the guest playing cowboy. Predictably, they arrive in the sector where we saw Ford and his unregistered host family. As they go inside, she mentions that this building isn't on any survey they have of park, and Bernard explains that's because they use hosts to do most of their surveys. They're programmed not to survey this place and wouldn't be able to even if they saw it. They don't find the unregistered hosts, and Bernard says that Ford must have moved them. Theresa notices a door and goes through it. Bernard makes a strange pause before entering, which gives us a hint at what's to come. They find what Bernard calls a remote diagnostics facility that Ford and his partner used to use when the park was in beta. He says he had no idea this one was here, and that the cottage must have been built on top of it. There's equipment in there to build hosts, which Bernard says is slower than what they have at the Mesa, but it's still newer than what they should have had back then. Theresa then says the obvious, that Ford's been making hosts out there without telling anyone. She notices drawings on the desk where, we see the boy, we see Dolores, and then she pauses when she sees the third. She asks Bernard if he's seen them, and when she shows him the drawing of himself, he says this doesn't look like anything to me. At the same time, Ford arrives and tells her that he's made them so that they don't notice things that would hurt them. Bernard looks as shocked as us and starts to melt down a little bit. Theresa calls Ford a monster, and when Bernard continues to freak out, Ford simply just switches them off. Scene is fantastically acted, and Ford and Theresa go back and forth a bit, which leads to her trying to threaten him. He tells her that the board will do nothing, and that they try from time to time, but he basically always gets his way. He repeats again what he said about him and Arnold building everything in the park from the first showdown they had. He says that the hosts are the free ones here under his control. She says Bernard isn't under his control, after all he brought her there, and he says Bernard did that because he told him to. At this point, she realizes she's in real danger and finds out she can't use her phone where they are. He reminds her once again that he built everything in this place. She mentions that his time of playing God is over, and he turns that right back around on her. He says he just wanted to tell us stories, and that it was Delos who wanted to play God. Then he has Bernard kill her, which he does without question. He calmly takes off his glasses and tie, and then walks over to her and beats her to death with his bare hands. After the deed is done, Ford tells him that he ought to be getting back. He has a lot of work to do to get the new storylines ready. With Theresa's body slumped against the wall, the two leave and the episode ends. Holy hell! So I guess we should just go ahead and talk about the big reveal first. I'm not shocked that Bernard was a host. There was a lot of theories that pointed in this direction and a lot of clues along the way, and with each episode it seemed to be more and more possible. What I will say about the reveal though is that they managed to keep the illusion going right up until the point where Bernard didn't know about the door. I'm not 100% sure without going back and checking, but if I remember that scene where Bernard showed up at the first time at the cottage, we couldn't see the door then either. It seemed like in that scene that Ford just popped up out of thin thin air when he stopped his father from attacking him. But yeah, Bernard's a host. As much as this was a reveal, it also opened a door to a million more questions. We'll get to all those in a minute, but let's talk about what else happened first. It's interesting to see how the corporate thing is playing out, but it's kind of a mystery to me, at least, that like what is their end game and what is this thing they keep talking about that's so much more valuable than the actual park itself. They set Clementine up to take one for the team, and I must say that the presentation of this scene, while completely hard to watch at first, was pretty amazing overall. It was sad to see Clementine go, which was a nod to the character building the show does with the host, even though we know they're not real people, and also the acting that went into the character. The way Ford sat back, though, and let them do the whole thing, like the whole played out thing without saying a word, was top shelf. Bernard getting fired was a bit of a shock at first, but Ford's silence led on that this wouldn't actually play out that way. In retrospect, it set up the ending perfectly, and even before that, set the story straight about who is actually in charge. It leaves me wondering what else we don't know, especially considering that the reveries from the beginning of the season have turned out to play this huge role. Was it all part of his plan from the beginning? And if so, where's he headed with this? I definitely don't know, which is a good thing as far as I'm concerned. I don't think anyone thought that William would stick to his "I have a woman waiting for me back at home" story, and even though it was telegraphed, I didn't mind that he ended up falling for Dolores. I think it's clever that part of what's attractive to him is that he somewhat knows she's off script. There's something wrong with the way she's acting, and it's pretty good that we know in the back of his mind that he still likely has skepticism about the whole situation in general. Charlotte turned out to be a formidable player in the game, but we learned quickly that she's no match for Ford. On the other side of things, we find out Maeve's plan is to leave the park, which that should get interesting. I mentioned this in my last video, and after the fact concluded that it was likely the only thing that she would actually want. Again, Thandie Newton's acting was incredible, and I kind of love Felix and Sylvester in that their whole purpose is to have no defenses against her. So now that one theory came to be that Bernard was a host, I can think of a couple that come to mind during the reveal. First might be the most obvious, but it's worth mentioning in case anyone missed it. He had Bernard kill Theresa in an area of the park that is off the radar, and where he can make his own hosts. Now, I saw the trailer and it looks like he's pulling a sheet over Theresa's face with Stubbs and Charlotte right there, so I'm not saying that he's trying to replace her per se, but I couldn't help thinking while I was watching is what is stopping him from killing anyone and then just replacing that person with a host that's under his control? I mean, Bernard is basically a boss in the organization, so if he's a host, it means that Ford's pretty good at concealing the identities of hosts if he wants to. Even if he didn't kill Theresa with the intention of replacing her, I think it stands to reason that he could. Also, it's a stretch, but the two people present when he's pulling the sheet over her could be hosts as well. The rabbit hole gets pretty deep there, so I'm just going to leave it at that, but that's what I was thinking when they left her body against the wall. I mean, the shot of Bernard beating her was set up so that we watched it happen behind the new host being built. Since Bernard is a host, what do we think as far as his origin? He could just be a random host, like Dolores seems to be, or he could be a man whose image Ford recreated a host with, or there's that popular theory out there that he could actually be a host that's built in Arnold's image. I'm not ready to say that he is the recreation of Arnold, but there is a compelling argument for it. One of the clues hinges on there also being alternate timelines, so the fact that we saw that room under the cottage and it looked a lot like where Bernard was interviewing Dolores by himself kind of fits in with that. Also, the whole idea that he couldn't see his own drawing kind of makes you wonder about whenever he looked at that picture and he saw, what looked like a blank space, that it might have been him that was there. Anyways, to follow along with the timeline thing, if you're not 100% sure how it works, there are two timelines and it's confusing because both include Dolores. 30 years ago, Dolores is running around with William. In present time, Dolores is the one that had the conversation with her father, Peter Abernathy, and then passed on these violent delights have violent ends to Maeve. She's also the one that interacts with Teddy after he's updated with his backstory, and the one we see dragged into the barn by the man in black. It's confusing, I know, but that's the part that really makes it hard to say, since we see Dolores and we expect that her story is linear, as in all the things that happen are happening one right after the other. Anyways, when Bernard is talking to her in a little room like that, which we don't see anyone else ever use, plus she's always clothed, which is strange compared to all the other interviews we see the techs having, because they're always naked. All of this could be explained away, of course, but seeing that room might be a clue that those scenes where he talks to Dolores alone aren't what we believe them to be. I've been skeptical about the multiple timelines, but after seeing the new logo in the last episode kind of exactly in the same place where the old one was when in that welcome video when William first arrived, well, that's getting harder and harder to explain away. I'm not exactly sure how things will play out, but can say for sure that the show is great about putting enough misdirection in there to keep us guessing. Not confirmation on anything besides the fact that Bernard is a host, but a lot of stuff to think about until the next episode airs. As Dolores and William converge on the maze and the Man in Black gets closer himself, I guess it'll all start making more sense. I mean, it seems like a blaring hole in the whole thing if that William is headed to the maze, and if he's the Man in Black, why doesn't the Man in Black already know? But if you think about it, Dolores has never really told him that's what she's looking for. And oh yeah, where the hell is Elsie? Let me know what you guys think. Please like the video if you enjoyed it and leave me comments to discuss all the different things that happened. I'll try to respond to any questions you have, and please subscribe to my channel so you'll know when my new videos come out. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.